Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at the University of Calgary today. My name is Anders Nygren. I am the interim dean of the Schulich School of Engineering, and it is our pleasure today to host today's exciting federal government announcements. So on behalf of President Macaulay, I'm pleased to welcome Minister Wilkinson, MP Chahal, federal government representatives, students, and colleagues from across the University of Calgary. And before we officially begin this morning, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of the Treaty 7 region here in southern Alberta. And these include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nation, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Goodstoney First Nations. And the City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. So here at the University of Calgary, we are proud to be Canada's most entrepreneurial university and a top research institution in Canada's most enterprising city. Across 5 campuses, we educate 37,000 students, creating the skilled talent and fostering the innovation needed to grow and diversify Alberta's and Canada's economy. UCalgary is a place to start something. In fact, UCalgary is a top startup creator. We have created over 90 companies in the last 5 years, more than any other university in Canada. And we have one of the fastest rates of growth for our research funding in Canada, with $588 million of externally funded research revenue in the past year. And 1/3 of that funding comes from the federal government that's generally investing in research to find solutions to society's biggest challenges. And importantly, another 1/3 of that funding comes from industry and the community, reinforcing the relevance of the research that we do at the university. We're driven by our entrepreneurial spirit and our commitment to translating research into real-world impact. The kind of impact that creates jobs, that changes lives, and transforms whole industries. We greatly appreciate the partnership and the investment from the federal government in important areas of research, including carbon management and clean technology development and novel approaches to emissions reductions. And from a Schulich perspective, these partnerships are integral to the work we do in creating advances in traditional oil and gas technologies and building up new energy technologies like hydrogen and geothermal. So the University of Calgary looks forward to our new collaborations in these critical areas as we work to create a better future together. So I would now like to introduce you to today's MC. George Chahal is the Member of Parliament for Calgary Skyview. He is a well-known community leader and long-term advocate for our city. In fact, before his election as an MP in 2021, he represented Ward 5 as a Calgary City Councillor. And prior to entering public office, he worked in the financial sector as well as in construction and development. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming MP George Chahal to the podium.
Thank you, Anders, for the kind introduction. Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone joining us today. I'm George Chahal, Member of Parliament for Calgary Skyview, and I'll be your MC for today's event. It's a pleasure to be here for this important announcement, and being back here, second home for me for many, many years that I spent here as an alumni and had a lot of great and fond memories of the University of Calgary. Alberta's energy powers Canada and the world. The natural resource sector in Alberta is a critical economic driver that creates jobs for families and communities. Alberta's leadership in the resource space is demonstrated by the way that Albertan innovators are working to build new technologies that will cut pollution from the operations of key industries and ensure prosperity now and into the future. Today's announcement demonstrates the federal government's action to work together with Albertan innovators and the federal government's investment in made-in-Alberta technologies to reduce pollution while growing jobs. To make the announcement today, please join me in welcoming Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, the Federal Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. Let's give Minister Wilkinson a loud Calgary reception.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Certainly great to be here with all of you and with my colleague, George, who has been a champion for resource issues in Ottawa. He's the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, which has not been necessarily an easy job in the context of the Parliament that was happening over the course of the past year, but he has been dogged in his promotion of the interests of resources here and across the country. Canada is a nation of innovators, and certainly Alberta and folks in Alberta have contributed greatly to this. From the oil and gas that has powered the past century to more recent innovations in massive wind and solar farms, hydrogen, Alberta is an energy powerhouse for Canada and for the world. From critical minerals to renewable energy to oil and gas to hydrogen and biofuels, net zero petrochemical facilities, Alberta's natural resources create thousands of jobs and drive economic opportunities for workers and businesses. And Alberta innovators are working to build new technologies that will cut pollution from the operations of key industries, ensuring prosperity now and into the future. Ces technologies s'inscrivent dans le cadre d'une évolution rapide de l'économie et de la finance mondiale qui permettent de ne pas opposer l'environnement et l'économie. Le changement climatique transforme rapidement l'économie et la finance mondiale, créant des opportunités économiques pour ceux qui abordent le passage à un monde à faible émission de carbone de manière réfléchie, déterminée et stratégique. The global energy transformation is both an environmental imperative to protect the planet for future generations, but it is an economic opportunity on a scale similar to the Industrial Revolution. And Canada is very much leading in this transformation. As countries around the world move aggressively and strategically to seize opportunities, they are looking to Canada's leadership when it comes to building a cleaner, more prosperous, and more secure future for the planet. Companies around the world are drawn to our abundance of natural resources, from the critical minerals needed for defense applications, semiconductors, batteries, solar panels, to the crops like soy and canola that put us at the forefront of biofuels research. But more important, they're attracted to Canada because we have a thoughtful and ambitious economic strategy that is creating wealth and good jobs in every region of this country. A strategy that does not pit choices that promote affordability, job creation, and future prosperity against choices that lead to a cleaner environment for our children and for our grandchildren. In fact, these opportunities go hand in hand. For Canada to seize the extraordinary economic opportunities presented, we must first accept the scientific reality of climate change and ensure that this helps to inform and shape Canada's economic strategy in a stable and predictable way. A key element of that economic strategy is to ensure significant focus on seizing economic opportunities in new and accelerating sectors, such as critical minerals, biofuels, nuclear technologies, carbon capture, and hydrogen production. Such economic opportunities are going to be different in different parts of this country. The opportunities of a low-carbon economy in Nova Scotia are different than those in BC, are different again from those here in Alberta. One of the most effective ways that we have been identifying and deploying those opportunities are through what we call the Regional Energy and Resource Tables, known in Alberta as the Canada-Alberta Working Group. I will tell you that despite what you may hear sometimes in the media, the working group has made significant progress. We've had very productive discussions on a range of issues, including electricity, nuclear energy and SMRs, and liquid natural gas, just to name a few. Conversations that should help us to align funding and unlock good projects. As the working group demonstrates, Canadians are most effective in solving problems when we work together. Right now, as I'm sure I don't need to remind this audience, we are facing economic pressure and threats from our closest ally and trading partner. In discussions about how to respond, I've heard very clearly that some folks here in Alberta are worried that any potential Canadian response, should tariffs come into play, could unfairly target and hurt Albertans. And I just want to be very clear about one thing, that this will not happen. We are primarily focused on trying to ensure that tariffs are never imposed. And I was in Washington last week, and I will be there again next week, to try to make the case that tariffs actually hurt Americans almost as much as they would hurt Canadians. To try to ensure that we actually have a more productive conversation about a partnership in the energy and mineral space that can help to enable President Trump to achieve a number of the objectives on which he campaigned, but do so in a manner that actually create jobs and economic opportunity in Canada, not pain on both sides of the border. Of course, Canadians would expect that should tariffs come into play, that their government will be capable of responding. We certainly cannot be in a position where Canadians believe that their government is incapable of action to respond. But any response needs to be done in a thoughtful way, targeting products that will hurt Americans more than they will hurt Canadians. And they will have to be done in a manner that is regionally fair, regionally equitable, and does not target any specific sector of the country. That is the responsibility of a federal government. We must ensure that we treat every part of the Federation equally. And that is a commitment that certainly I make to Albertans, as I would make it to Nova Scotians and to British Columbians. Certainly, energy is a big topic of conversation in many of these things. And as I say, we have been pitching the Americans what we call an energy and minerals alliance that would actually identify specific projects that would be relevant to Alberta, relevant to British Columbia, relevant to a number of provinces, but that would go in the opposite direction of tariffs to build economic opportunity for both countries in mutual benefit, rather than getting into some kind of a tit-for-tat out of which nobody benefits. One of the reasons Alberta is so crucial to the conversation on building a healthy economy for the future is that Albertans know a thing or two about turning challenging problems into prosperity. In just the last few years, we have seen significant results of investment in clean growth and innovation. You need look no further than the $12 billion net zero Dow petrochemical facility near Edmonton, a $30 million biogas facility near Lethbridge, the $1.6 billion Air Products net zero hydrogen plant in the Edmonton area, the $720 million that are being invested for the largest renewable diesel facility by Imperial Oil, again near Edmonton, and the $2 billion that Strathcona is investing in a carbon capture project, which will store up to 2 million tons of carbon dioxide annually, captured mainly in Alberta, but also to a certain extent in Saskatchewan. Carbon capture and management is a particularly important opportunity for Alberta's economy. Alberta has favorable regulatory process and geology, and Canada leads in the development of several key CCUS technologies. Carbon capture projects will allow Alberta's energy products to thrive in a global market that is increasingly going to be favoring products that come with lower emissions. Carbon capture can enable Canada's oil and gas sector to thrive in a low-carbon world. It can also offer significant opportunity for the export of technologies developed right here in Canada. Which brings me to the announcement today. Today, I am very pleased to announce a federal investment of $13.5 million in 7 projects in Calgary and Edmonton that will support made in Alberta carbon management technologies to reduce pollution while growing jobs. The funding comes from the Energy Innovation Program's carbon capture stream, which is supporting research and development into next-generation carbon capture technologies. These technologies have wide-ranging commercial applications and will significantly reduce the costs of CCUS, which is a must if we want to ensure the competitiveness of Canadian technologies in a world that, as I have said, is racing to seize the opportunities of a low-carbon future. Today's recipients include InnoTech Alberta, which is receiving $2.5 million to study improvements into the energy demands of carbon capture systems. Ionada Canada, which is receiving $4.7 million to demonstrate carbon management systems that look to reduce costs by up to 40%. The University of Alberta, which is receiving $4.3 million for 2 projects to study various forms of carbon capture technology and cost-efficient implementation. And I would like to particularly recognize the University of Calgary, which is receiving $4.3 million for 3 projects to enhance carbon capture data, improve assessments of carbon management technologies, and develop a new made in Alberta carbon capture technology that addresses emissions from electric arc furnaces in the steel industry. one of the key Canadian industries that is aiming to achieve neutral carbon emissions by 2050. We were just having a conversation about this particular project. It utilizes a technology that is very similar to a technology that of a company that I used to run before making the crazy decision to enter politics. So these investments will allow Alberta's companies to continue leading the way in terms of carbon capture innovation by turning emissions into opportunity. Carbon capture transforms pollution into progress, paving the way for a cleaner and more prosperous future. Alberta's leadership in energy did not happen by accident. It happened because generations of pragmatic, business-minded Albertans looked to the future and saw the opportunities of modern energy and acted on them in a thoughtful and a determined manner. Aujourd'hui, en 2025, nous sommes confrontés à des choix similaires et nous devrons continuer à les faire de manière réfléchie et déterminée si nous voulons rester à la pointe du développement et de l'exportation énergétique. Alberta was built by innovators and workers who were able to step up to the challenges of the moment, the modern threats of climate change and of the economic security risks posed by China and Russia, which are coming our way, and they are coming fast. On the one hand, we could choose to bury our heads in the sand and pretend that the world is not increasingly seeing the costs and the tragedies of climate impacts, an approach that will create uncertainty and drive away economic investment and well-paying jobs. This, unfortunately, is the path thus far that has been chosen by the opposition in this country. The absence of any recognition of the reality of climate change and the absence of any kind of economic plan that is focused on seizing economic opportunities of a low-carbon future, something our allies and certainly our competitors like China have long ago figured out, represents a grave threat to Canada's future economic competitiveness and its prosperity. It is clear that the vast majority of Canadians understand that at the end of the day, our economic prosperity and the health of our planet depend on us building a cleaner future. Canada can and must and will be there to meet the moment and to prosper from it in the rapidly expanding carbon capture technology space and across all of our natural resource sectors. So thank you very much for joining us for this important announcement today. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister Wilkinson, for today's announcement. I will now ask Dr. George Shimizu, Professor of University of Calgary's Department of Chemistry, to say a few words. Dr. Shimizu?
Right. So to begin, let me thank Natural Resources Canada and Minister Wilkinson for funding the Energy Innovation Program. Problems in energy tend to be very, very big problems. And one of the key challenges for potential step change technology is the ability to demonstrate at progressively larger and larger scales, progressively larger and progressively longer scales. This funding program for us hits exactly this critical gap between being able to test something at a bench scale and test something at a first scale pilot. So the target for our project is an electric arc furnace at Drozdowski Steel in Hamilton. And so we make things on a sub-gram scale, but we will be able to scale this with our engineering partners at University of Alberta, partners at University of Ottawa, membrane manufacturer White Fox Technologies that is located just across from McMahon Stadium, and ultimately with ArcelorMittal Drozdowski and CanMet Energy, part of Natural Resources Canada. The steel industry contributes roughly 8% of global GHG emissions, and a huge step they are making is to translate more to electric arc furnaces, which rely on recycled steel rather than having to mine and refine fresh iron ore. So it is a dramatic decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. And so hopefully in about 5 years or so, we will be capturing several 100,000 tons of carbon dioxide from an electric arc furnace site in Hamilton. The learnings from this will absolutely translate to broader decarbonization efforts that are highly applicable in Alberta and giving all Albertans cleaner energy and a cleaner environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shimizu. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Joule Bergerson, professor at the University of Calgary's Department of Chemical and Petroleum Engineering. Professor Bergerson, please come forward. Thank you.
Just move this down. Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to be here today to talk about two exciting research projects made possible through the support of Natural Resources Canada. This funding is enabling groundbreaking research that will advance our understanding of carbon management technologies and help better inform decisions for Canada's energy and climate future. The first project, titled Advancing Data and Methods for CDR Assessment, is led by my colleague Sean McCoy here at the University of Calgary in the Schulich School of Engineering, who unfortunately had other obligations today. This project focuses on improving quality, quantity, and accessibility of data for life cycle assessment and techno-economic analysis of carbon dioxide removal technologies. High-quality data and assessments that reflect the Canadian climate specifically is critical to evaluating the feasibility, efficiency, and long-term impacts of these technologies. This work will provide the robust foundation needed for policymakers and industry leaders to make informed decisions about which carbon dioxide removal pathways can best support Canadian and global net zero goals. The second initiative, titled Assessment of Carbon Capture and Conversion Technologies Research Network, that I lead, is dedicated to developing tools that analyze carbon conversion technologies and their potential roles across diverse sectors of the economy. By examining fuel pathways, trade-offs between electrification and chemical fuels, and uncertain future economic conditions, this research will provide a comprehensive view of the opportunities and risks involved. These insights will be instrumental in guiding decisions that maximize innovation while minimizing unintended consequences, ensuring a balanced and strategic approach to the development and potential deployment of such technologies. At the heart of both of these projects is innovation, the creation of tools, methods, and data systems that will empower stakeholders to make evidence-based decisions. But these efforts are not just about advancing technology. They are about providing clarity to complex systems so that we can move forward with confidence. With these advancements, we'll be better positioned to design strategies that are effective, equitable, and aligned with Alberta's and Canada's broader economic and environmental sustainability goals. Both projects, like George's, also include extensive collaboration across Canada. So both projects involve researchers at the University of Toronto and the University of Alberta, as well as those here at the University of Calgary, and will ensure that we help and get better equipped to make meaningful strides in understanding and advancing technologies that have the potential to transform the way we address carbon emissions and climate resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bergerson. Our last speaker is Bonnie Drozdowski, the Executive Director of Environment, Bioindustrial, and Clean Technologies at InnoTech, Alberta. Please welcome Bonnie to the podium.
Thank you. I'd first like to say thank you to Minister Wilkinson and NRCan for supporting our amine intensification project and advancing CCUS technologies in general. Like George said, my name is Bonnie Drozdowski, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to speak on behalf of InnoTech Alberta and Alberta Innovates. As we're all aware, the ability to advance and adopt CCUS technologies is very important to Alberta's industry and to its future economy. Like Minister Wilkinson said, CCUS is a very important pathway for Alberta and its oil and gas industries to meet emissions reduction goals, and is also key to unlocking the potential of low-emission hydrogen production. From our project specifically that is receiving funding from this announcement today, it's related to carbon capture. Carbon capture is the first step in any CCUS project, and it's also the most expensive. The high cost has been a key barrier to widespread adoption of CCUS technologies. And while the CO2 capture process using amine-based technologies has been around for decades, after operating a 6-ton per day amine-based system, we've identified opportunities for operating the system that's for improvement and advancement of the CCUS process. So traditional amine processes are capital intensive and use a lot of energy, and as a result have a high cost and carbon footprint in relation to other carbon capture technologies. We can mitigate this using alternative heating mechanisms such as microwave technologies and water lean solvents to release CO2 faster and at lower temperatures. As a result, our amine intensification process is intended to reduce the energy requirements by up to 75%. This work is being done at InnoTech Alberta's Carbon Conversion Technology Centre, or the ACCTC, which is a facility that has been built to accelerate the development of carbon capture technologies and utilization technologies at a pre-commercial scale. It's built next to the Shepherd Energy Centre, an 860 megawatt natural gas fueled power generation facility, which captures carbon emissions from the flue stack, brings it over to our site where we concentrate them and make them available for utilization technologies to de-risk at an operational scale. The amine intensification process will be demonstrated at a pilot scale with a 1 ton per day capacity in 2026, and I invite all of you to come out and see it for yourself. I'd like to thank you and Minister Wilkinson and everyone who's joined us here today for advancing technology to cement Canada's position as a leader in CCUS technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, and once again, thank you all for joining us today. We'll now open it up for questions from the media. If I could ask Carolyn Svonikin, who will moderate the media availability. Oh, you're over there. Okay, perfect.
Thank you, MP Chahal. As mentioned, we will now open it up to the floor for media questions. You can feel free to step up to this mic, and before you pose your question, please just state your name and what outlet you're reporting from. And if your question is directed to one particular speaker, please indicate that as well. We will have time for one question and one follow-up, as we also have folks on the line, so we'll have to toggle between folks in person and those dialing in virtually.
Laurence Tachereau, Radio Canada. I'm going to ask Mr. Wilkinson to answer first in French, and then if you could answer in English, that would be greatly appreciated. Le gouvernement promet de l'aide aux entreprises et aux citoyens si les Américains mettent à exécution leurs menaces de tarifs. Comment allez-vous pouvoir aider les Canadiens avant le retour du Parlement le 24 mars?
Mais on doit attendre, il n'y a pas les tarifs maintenant, et nous travaillons maintenant avec les provinces et les territoires pour avoir les conversations avec M. Trump et l'administration américaine sur le sujet des tarifs et pourquoi les tarifs vont causer les impacts dans les États-Unis, pas seulement au le Canada. Mais bien sûr, s'il y a les tarifs, on doit soutenir les Canadiens et les entreprises durant cette période, mais c'est difficile de dire exactement qui et exactement
so it's...
Did you?
Okay, we'll swap the cable again. Does anybody have one handy and I'll swap it right now? Oh, somebody kicked our thing. Okay. All right, it's solved.
Solved? Okay. Thank you. Same thing, follow up in French and English, please. Maintenant que les États-Unis abandonnent le IRA, donc Inflation Reduction Act, et la réduction des émissions, quel avenir voyez-vous pour les clean tech canadiennes? Perte de marché, opportunité?
Oui, President Trump a décidé de couper quelques programmes sur la loi de réduction d'inflation, mais il n'a pas touché les réductions, les tax incentives. Et c'est les comment est-ce qu'on dit en français, mais les tax incentives qui sont le plus fort utiles sur cette loi. Et on doit attendre encore pour voir si il veut avoir le Congrès éliminer ces programmes aussi. Mais bien sûr, on va avoir bien sûr quelques impacts dans les États-Unis. Probablement, le déploiement des technologies propres va procéder un petit peu plus lentement. Je crois que c'est une opportunité pour le Canada et pour les technologies propres, les compagnies qui produisent les technologies propres qui existent ici. Mais je crois que à l'avenir, ça va être un problème pour les États-Unis. Maintenant, la Chine, c'est en avance avec les technologies renouvelables, avec les voitures électriques, avec les minéraux critiques et les processus pour raffiner les minéraux critiques. Et c'est quelque chose que peut-être le Canada peut travailler pour assurer que l'Ouest continue d'être compétitif avec la Chine, mais bien sûr, il y a les choses qui vont être impactées dans les États-Unis, bien sûr. With the Inflation Reduction Act, President Trump has effectively eliminated a bunch of the grants programs as part of the executive orders. But he has not, to date, touched the tax credits, and that likely requires some act in Congress. Those are the bulk of the spending under the Inflation Reduction Act, and to be honest with you, the bulk of the funds that have flown or that have flowed out of the Inflation Reduction Act have actually gone to Republican states. So there may be a lot of reluctance to eliminate those. I do think that the lack of focus on clean energy does create some opportunities for technology companies in Canada. I think that we will continue to push to support companies to develop technologies that are going to be needed moving forward, and that are going to be needed by the West in the context of what is certainly going to be increasingly competitive activities vis-a-vis China. China right now is the largest deployer, largest manufacturer of electric vehicles. They are the largest manufacturer and the largest deployer of renewable energy technologies. They control most of the critical minerals value chains around the world, and they process almost all of it. At the end of the day, even if the United States is going to pause some of those supports, the West actually needs to continue, or we are going to be left behind by technologies that are now cost competitive and are just better technologies. So Canada needs to be thoughtful and focused about how we actually see this perhaps as an opportunity, and we will obviously continue to be working with states in the United States like California and a range of others that we did during the first Trump presidency.
G'day, Minister. Emma with the Globe and Mail. Some cool carbon capture stuff, but all tariffs all the time, unfortunately, so we'll just stick with that, mate. Now, we spoke when you were down in the States last week or the week before, and yet we're seeing absolutely no movement from the Trump administration in terms of backing away from this. So doesn't seem like you guys have been very successful. What more can you do, and what more is on the table here?
Well, welcome back to Canada, Emma. I think the last time I talked to you, you were in Texas. So,
Yeah.
So look, I have said to people, we need to take a breath, a long breath. This is going to be a bumpy ride. Things are not going to get solved in a couple of weeks. And even determining exactly what it is that President Trump wants is not a simple thing. When I was in Washington a couple of weeks ago, I met with many senior Republican folks, including people like Senator Ted Cruz, who's been around for a little while, certainly knows Donald Trump very well. And when you talk to all of those folks, the general answer you get is, we don't really understand why they're targeting Canada. It doesn't really seem to make any economic sense. And when you ask them, what do you think he's going to do? They all say, we have no idea. With President Trump, he talks to a lot of people. It's not entirely clear who holds a lot of influence, but he talks to a lot of people. And so part of any strategy for a thoughtful strategy is to talk to a lot of people, such that he's hearing similar messages from a whole range of folks. That's not just people in his administration, that's certainly people in Congress, but it's also American business. I met with the American Petroleum Institute, the Edison Institute, a whole range of American business, because at the end of the day, it is American business talking to Americans that are going to be more persuasive than Canadians trying to tell Americans that we know what's in their best interest. So it's not just me. My colleagues, Minister Joly, Minister Champagne, Minister LeBlanc, have been down in the United States quite frequently, and we will continue to do that to ensure that the message is heard. We obviously are interested not just in telling them why tariffs are a bad idea, but we are also trying to provide alternatives as essentially a way to allow the administration to see that they have gained something of value that is consistent with some of the things they campaigned on, but to do so in a manner that doesn't, break the relationship that exists with Canada and the United States, that actually enables us to continue and perhaps in some respects to deepen that relationship. So I think that we are moving in the right direction. I think in our areas, in my areas, we are fortunate that Doug Burgum and Chris Wright are actually going to be confirmed within the next number of days. Both of those folks know Canada well. I think both of those, Burgum having been the governor of North Dakota, would understand the negative impacts of tariffs. But you can't guarantee that this is not going to happen. We have to make our best efforts, just as Premier Smith has been making her best efforts. And then we will see what happens, and we will have to respond to that circumstance if and when it arrives.
And then on that nature of response, you mentioned in your comments earlier this equitable response, as you said. So, for example, Alberta, Nova Scotia, we're going to make sure it's all kind of, equality, big thing across the whole country. But how do you do that when there are such completely disparate amounts of exports to the United States? What does that exactly look like, or could it look like?
Well, there are certainly disparate amounts in absolute terms, but you also have to look at it in terms of percent exposure. Like, I think the most exposed province in terms of trade with the United States actually isn't Alberta or Ontario, it's New Brunswick. So I think you're never going to have a perfect sort of every province has exactly the same impact. But you do have to think about trying to ensure that you are not asking any particular region of the country to do significantly more than others. How you do that is not necessarily going to be simple, and it really does depend on how the tariffs are applied. Like, if it's a broad-based tariff across all sectors, everybody's getting hit, right? That everybody is. If it's a sector, if it's essentially a tariff that actually exempts energy, for example, well, then it's more Ontario that's getting hit. And so how we respond to that is going to have to be thoughtful. We have to ensure that everybody is, if there is pain to be felt, that everybody is feeling some pain and everybody is seeing some benefit come back from the supports. But it really will depend on exactly how those tariffs are framed.
Hi there, Josh McLean, CBC News. And if you don't mind answering in English and French, please. So first off, what are you hearing from energy and natural resource companies? Are they ready if tariffs do go ahead on Saturday, as the White House says they might?
Well, they're certainly aware that that's a possibility. How do you get, I'm not entirely sure how you get ready. I mean, they will be facing the situation where their products are all going to get marked up by 25% if that's what happens. and they will be looking to ensure that that tariff is paid by the customers in the United States rather than them. That's obviously going to be, in some cases, a bit of a negotiation. If you were an American refinery, you'd probably be pushing back and trying to have some of that tariff absorbed upstream in Canada. So I think they all have been developing strategies with respect to how they will manage that. They also obviously have been doing their own lobbying in Washington, and that includes working through their customers to actually have their customers speak directly to the Trump administration. And we certainly have been talking to them. I have probably spoken to most of the CEOs in energy and resource companies in this country over the past few weeks. I had a large roundtable in Saskatoon yesterday. I have one right after this here. You know, we're trying to ensure that we are coordinated and that we're hearing from them in terms of what they would be liking us to do, and we're also encouraging them to weigh in themselves. C'est très difficile pour les entreprises d'être prêtes pour les tarifs. C'est bien sûr, ils savent que c'est possible qu'on a les tarifs cette semaine, ou peut-être en avril. Et bien sûr, ils ont les conversations avec leurs partenaires américains sur comment on peut communiquer avec l'administration Trump, mais aussi, bien sûr, probablement quelques entreprises doivent avoir les négociations avec leurs partenaires américains sur le sujet de qui vont payer les tarifs. Bien sûr, nous avons beaucoup de conversations avec les entreprises ici. J'avais une table ronde hier à Saskatoon. J'ai une table ronde après cette rencontre. Et nous discutons comment on peut travailler ensemble pour protéger le Canada, pour communiquer avec l'administration Trump, mais aussi pour les situations qui peut-être vont arriver si les tarifs viennent.
Now, if tariffs do go ahead, understand the government's working on an aid package. You'll need to get that through the House of Commons. Have you been discussing it with opposition parties, and how hard is it going to be to get them to support such a package?
Yeah, I mean, I think the dynamic has changed a little bit in that regard. I think you probably saw Mr. Singh's statement yesterday, evidencing more openness in that conversation. So I would expect that the respective House leaders will be having some conversations if, in fact, there is a need for support, and if, in fact, that does need parliamentary approval. But I don't want to get ahead of myself again. I mean, it depends a little bit on whether the tariffs come and the nature of what that looks like. But I would expect that there is at least more openness to a conversation than there might have been a couple of months ago. Je crois que les députés pour chaque parti vont avoir quelques conversations sur le sujet de Parlement si on a besoin d'avoir le Parlement passer quelque chose pour soutenir les employés et les entreprises. Mais M. Singh a dit hier que peut-être il est ouvert de cette conversation. Mais on doit attendre jusqu'à nous savons s'il y a les tarifs. Mais bien sûr, je crois qu'il y a beaucoup plus d'ouverture maintenant d'avoir les conversations entre les partis, particulièrement avec les Nouveaux démocrates et peut-être le Bloc québécois. Probablement pas M. Palais.
Hi, Noah Brennan from Postmedia. Has there been any movement on the Pathways Alliance Carbon Capture Network project?
We are continuing to work on the Pathways project. I would really like to see that move forward soon. I actually had a conversation with them this morning. And certainly have been talking to the government of Alberta. I will be meeting Premier Smith later today, and I'm certain that we will be talking a little bit about pathways. We are trying to find a way to get over a couple of issues, but certainly it is important if we're going to move this thing forward before what could be an election in April or May that happen in the next few weeks.
All right, we will now move to folks on the line. I think we'll only have time for about 2 questions, just we are running to the end of time. But I will pass it over to our NRCan officials who are moderating virtually.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Hello, everyone. I'm Margot Bedalt. I'm the Director of Media and Events at Natural Resources Canada and moderating from on the line. So for those of you on the line to ask a question, use the raise your hand button on the button at the bottom of your screen. If you are online, if you're on the phone, press *3. When it's your turn, you'll be prompted to unmute the microphone, *6 for phone users. So please share your name and outlet and who you are directing the question to. After a question or follow-up, your mic will be muted. Bonjour à tous, je m'appelle Margot Bedalt, directrice des relations avec les médias et des événements. Et c'est une question, utilisez la fonction lever la main en bas de votre écran pour ça en ligne. Sur le téléphone, appuyez sur étoile 3 pour lever la main. Quand ce sera votre tour, vous serez invité à s'activer votre micro, étoile 6 pour ceux au téléphone. Et si vous pouvez indiquer votre nom et votre affiliation et à qui s'adresse votre question. So we'll now begin taking questions. Once again, please raise your hand. We have Erin Levitt from all Alberta. Go ahead, please.
Minister, you said in your remarks, all Albertans, one single sector will be unfairly or unequitably hurt. Are you essentially saying that, for example, cutting off oil exports south of the border should be off the table?
So in any prospective negotiation, it's never wise to actually take anything off the table before you even started negotiating with your counterpart. Anybody who's done any amount of negotiation would know that to be the case. So I would say the Government of Canada is of the view that Mr. Trump is a very skilled negotiator, that taking tools off the table before we've even entered a negotiation is just not wise. That being said, I would say that anything that we do has to be done in a thoughtful way. It has to ensure regional equitability. And it also has to ensure that we're not provoking long-term unintended consequences. And in that regard, I think Trevor Toom's article from earlier this week was a very thoughtful article about being thoughtful as to not cause or not provoke structural changes that are long-term. So I'm not saying that we are not going to look at doing that at all, ever. But I would say in the context of thinking about how best to respond, it has to be done in a manner that is thoughtful, that actually doesn't harm Canada's long-term interests, and as I say, that is regionally fair. And as somebody who is an MP from British Columbia but grew up in Saskatchewan, I am very, very, very live to the fact that you cannot single out the West. It has to be something that is going to be fair, and if there is pain, Quebec will feel it, Ontario will feel it, the West will feel it, Atlantic Canada will feel it. But we should look to try to ensure that it's equitable and that it's minimized as much as possible.
And just as a follow-up, what is going to be part of your conversation with Premier Smith as it pertains to this point that you're touching on?
So I think it's always useful to have conversations with provincial leaders. I think part of that will be happening at these what are likely to be weekly conversations between the premiers and the Prime Minister. But it's also important as the Energy and Resources Minister to be talking to particularly those premiers and ministers that represent resource-intensive economies. I spent some time talking to Premier Moe recently about some of these issues. I think it's important to have conversations with Premier Smith. She has been a very vocal and an active participant in the conversations in Washington and elsewhere. To be honest with you, I don't actually think that what we're saying is fundamentally different. I agree that, and I've always been of the view that diplomacy is first. We have to try to convince them not to put the tariffs into place. We would not be doing our jobs if we didn't do that. And we have to try to think about ways in which we can encourage the Americans to not put the tariffs into place, or if they do come into place, to withdraw them very quickly. And that's something that we have been doing through this concept of the Energy and Minerals Alliance, or partnership, not dissimilar to some of the things that Premier Smith has been talking about. We also, though, have to be cognizant of the fact that if the tariffs are put into place, and Premier Smith knows that, and every Premier knows this, that the Government of Canada would have to respond. Canadians would never accept the idea that we would essentially be slapped with what would create significant economic dislocation, and we would just sit on our hands and do nothing. I mean, appeasement didn't work well prior to the Second World War. Appeasement won't work well in this context. And so we will need to think about the ways in which we can actually create pressure on the United States. But as I say, the principles have to be that we are not doing more damage to ourselves than we are to them, and it has to be regionally equitable, and it cannot single out one specific sector.
Thank you. It looks like there are no more questions online, so this would conclude the event. Il n'y a plus de questions en ligne. Ceci conclut notre événement. Merci à tous.
Just before we finish, I think due to the sound cut, Radio-Canada was just hoping for a repeat of the answer, so maybe I'll pass it to you.
I can re-ask the question just because the Parliament Bureau didn't receive the answer because of the sound cut. So I'm sorry about that.
My first answer was perfect.
I know, and you're going to have to do it again even better. Je vais répéter la question pour avoir la même réponse. Le gouvernement promet de l'aide aux entreprises et aux citoyens si les Américains mettent à exécution leurs menaces de tarifs. Comment allez-vous pouvoir aider les Canadiens avant le retour du Parlement le 24 mars?
So, premièrement, je veux dire qu'on doit attendre. Nous n'avons pas maintenant les tarifs. Et cette question, c'est pour la période dans laquelle nous avons un tarif en place. Mais si l'administration américaine bouge de mettre en place les tarifs, nous avons dit que nous allons soutenir les travailleurs et les entreprises qui sont le plus impactés. Et il y a les programmes qui existent maintenant dans le gouvernement du Canada qu'on peut utiliser, mais bien sûr, c'est possible que nous devons avoir les sources d'argent qui viennent du Parlement. Et si ça c'est le cas, on doit avoir les conversations avec les autres partis politiques pour trouver si on peut avoir un accord pour voter pour les ressources qu'on a besoin. Et hier, M. Singh a dit qu'il est peut-être ouvert d'avoir cette conversation. Et bien sûr, s'il y a un besoin, on peut avoir ces conversations. I would say that we have to just wait a little bit. We don't have tariffs right now, and you know, moving to try to put in place programming to support those that are most impacted wouldn't make much sense until we know who those folks are. And our primary argument right now with the United States is we shouldn't have tariffs in the first place, and you know, we haven't given up on that, and that's why I'm going to Washington next week. But should the tariffs come into place, we have obviously been doing some thinking about how we could use some existing programs and existing resources to be able to provide some of that assistance. Should we need access to additional resources through Parliament, there is an option to be able to have conversations with the other political parties to see if there is sufficient support to call Parliament back to actually vote in favor of such a package. I think Mr. Singh of the NDP indicated he may be open to that. I'm not sure, maybe the Bloc Québécois would be. I highly doubt that Mr. Poilievre would be, but there may be an openness to having those conversations, but they're a bit premature right now.
All right, and with that, I'll pass back to MP Chahal to close the event.
Thank you for the Q&A. I would ask all speakers to join us for a group photo. Thank you for attending.